The greatest empires in history often rose from the most barren ground. This is the story of the agricultural innovations that turned arid landscapes into imperial breadbaskets. By the end of our journey, you will see the ancient blueprint for turning scarcity into overwhelming abundance, a set of ideas that feel startlingly urgent today. How did a network of hidden tunnels beneath the Persian desert fuel conquests that stretched from India to Greece? What forgotten farming practice kept the soil fertile for centuries while modern fields exhaust themselves in decades? We will uncover the ingenious methods that built superpowers from the ground up. What do you think it truly takes to make a desert bloom? This paradox lies at the very heart of our mystery. Lush, fertile land offers an easy bounty, one that can support scattered villages and small kingdoms. But a desert presents a stark ultimatum. You cannot simply scatter seeds and hope. Survival here demands a collective answer to a single, relentless question. Where will the water come from, and who decides how it is shared? This is the birthplace of the hydraulic empire, a concept where political power flows directly from the control of water. When a resource is desperately scarce, managing it becomes the most important job in society. Someone must organize the digging of canals that stretch for miles. Communities must agree on schedules, deciding which field gets irrigated and when. This requires laws, administrators, and enforcers. It demands a central authority powerful enough to coordinate thousands of people toward a common, survival-level goal. That framework of control, built initially to make the desert bear fruit, becomes the very skeleton of an empire. Think of the Roman legions stationed along the arid frontiers. Their famous discipline was not just for battle, it was for survival. Feeding those armies required vast, systematic farms in places where rain was unreliable. The state had to master water, or its soldiers would starve. Centuries later, the Abbasid Caliphate reached its golden age by reviving the ancient irrigation networks of Mesopotamia, turning that sun-baked land between two rivers into a colossal engine of agriculture and trade. The scarcity of water did not limit these civilizations, it defined them. It forced a scale of cooperation and innovation that lush lands simply never demanded. This environmental pressure cooker is where the most profound social and agricultural engineering was born, out of sheer necessity. The technologies we are about to explore were not just clever ideas, they were the tools of survival that forged empires. The first answer to that relentless question emerged not with grand canals, but with a whisper from deep underground. To find it, you must look for a strange pattern on a sun-blasted plain, a line of circular craters marching in perfect formation from a distant mountain range toward a parched settlement. From the surface, it seems almost alien, a mysterious dotted line etched into the earth. But beneath those craters lies one of humanity's most elegant and enduring solutions, the Kanat. Think of it not as a tunnel, but as an artificial underground river, engineered by hand over 3,000 years ago. Its genius is in its beautiful simplicity. Skilled surveyors would first locate a water-bearing layer, an aquifer nestled deep within the foothills of a mountain. Then, teams of diggers would begin carving a gently sloping tunnel backward from the point where they needed the water to emerge, their village or field. The vertical shafts, those surface craters, were not the Kanat itself, but access points for construction and for hauling out excavated earth and rock. The tunnel itself was the hidden highway, with a slope so carefully calculated that water would flow from the mountain source to the desert settlement using nothing but the relentless pull of gravity. This was a technology of profound patience and collective effort. A single Kanat could stretch for dozens of miles, take years to complete, and require the coordinated labor of an entire community. Its maintenance was a sacred duty passed down through generations because this subterranean vein was the literal lifeline of the settlement above. the Kanat solved the desert's greatest enemy, evaporation. By flowing in darkness protected from the searing sun, nearly every precious drop reached its destination. This invisible infrastructure transformed the impossible. Where once only nomads could pass, permanent towns took root. Orchards and wheat fields appeared in the middle of barren plains, fed by this secret, reliable bounty. The political power this created is hard to overstate. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, builders of Persepolis, mastered and spread the Qanat system, using it to stabilize and feed their vast territories. Later, Islamic caliphates refined and expanded the network, turning the Iranian plateau into a mosaic of green oases that supported magnificent cities of learning and trade. The Kanat was more than a water source. It was the physical foundation of civilization in some of the world's harshest landscapes, a silent testament to how cooperation and ingenuity can draw life from stone. But that hidden river could only take water so far. For a civilization to truly flourish, it needed to reach upward. The Nile's annual gift was a blessing of silt and moisture, yet its waters lay many feet below the vast, sun-baked plains that bordered it. How could a farmer lift that life-giving river to the waiting soil above, day after day, without exhausting an entire community? The answer was not a monumental machine, but a lesson in physics so elegant it became the heartbeat of the fields. It was the Shaduf. Picture a long wooden pole balanced like a seesaw on an upright frame. At one end hangs a leather bucket, at the other, a lump of dried mud or a stone acts as a counterweight. With a gentle pull, the farmer dips the bucket into the river. The counterweight does the hard work, swinging the full bucket up with astonishing ease, where its contents can be poured into a waiting ditch. This was irrigation democratized, where massive state-led canal projects moved water horizontally across kingdoms. The Shaduf empowered the individual. A single person or a small family could now cultivate a plot of land high above the riverbank, land that was beyond the reach of the natural flood. This simple lever effectively multiplied the arable land of Egypt many times over. Its impact rippled through every layer of society. With the Shaduf, a farmer could grow more than just enough to survive. He could produce a surplus, and it was that very surplus, harvested from thousands of these gently dipping buckets along the Nile, that built the pyramids. It fed the artisans, the scribes, the soldiers, and the vast administration of the pharaoh. It provided the economic stability that allowed for specialization, for art, for science, for grand projects that defined a civilization for millennia. The Shaduf was more than a tool, it was a quiet economic engine. Its rhythmic motion, repeated from dawn until dusk, lifted not just water, but the entire weight of an empire. It proved that the most profound innovations are often the simplest, turning basic mechanics into the foundation of enduring power. And while Egypt mastered the river, another empire faced a far more chaotic water source, one that demanded a different kind of genius entirely. The Shaduf gave power to the individual, but the river's full potential demanded something far grander. Along the banks of the Orontes River in ancient Syria, a new sound filled the air, a deep, rhythmic groaning of wood and water that announced a revolution in scale. This was the Noria, a water wheel of monumental ambition. Unlike simple paddles turned by animals or people, these colossal wooden wheels were powered by the river's own relentless current. Their design was a masterpiece of ancient engineering. As the flow caught the paddles or buckets fixed to the wheel's rim, the entire structure would begin to turn, a slow, unstoppable cycle. With each rotation, ceramic pots or wooden compartments scooped up hundreds of gallons from the river, lifting them high into the air before tipping their contents into a stone aqueduct that snaked toward the waiting fields and the city beyond. It was a fully automated irrigation system, working day and night without a single farmer lifting a finger. The scale was breathtaking. Some of these wheels stood over 60 feet tall, as high as a 6-story building, lifting water to heights that gravity-fed canals could never reach. In cities like Hama in Syria, these giants became the very heartbeat of urban life. Their continuous groan was the sound of survival and prosperity, lifting enough water to sustain not just crops, but public baths, lush private gardens, and the dense populations of a thriving metropolis. This was agriculture industrialized by nature's own hand. The Noria's gift was time. By automating the most labor-intensive task of all, it freed human effort for countless other pursuits, from crafting and commerce to scholarship and the arts. Vast orchards of olives, citrus, and nuts could now flourish on terraced hillsides, fed by this ceaseless mechanical bounty. It transformed cities like Damascus into the stuff of legend, described by travelers as a paradise of greenery rising from the desert, its air perfumed by blossoms and watered by the song of the turning wheels. The Noria represented a fundamental shift from using human energy to manage water to cleverly harnessing the environment's own kinetic energy to do the work. It showed that the path to abundance in an arid world was not just about moving water, but about building machines that let the landscape work for you. Yet, even these magnificent engines had a limitation. They were bound to the river's edge, slaves to its flow. To truly conquer the desert, an empire needed to think bigger, to move water across not just height but across staggering distances. This required a network of arteries so bold it would redefine the meaning of infrastructure. The river's current could turn a wheel, but it could not flatten a mountain. To feed an empire where flat land was a distant dream, farmers had to become sculptors, reshaping the very bones of the earth itself. They looked at a steep, rain-swept slope and saw not an obstacle but a canvas. Their tool was not a machine but a patient, generations-long act of architecture called terrace farming. The process was deceptively simple in concept, yet staggering in its execution. First, they would cut a long, level bench into the hillside. Then, they would build a strong retaining wall from stones cleared from the field, a wall that would hold back the immense weight of earth and water. Layer by layer, step by step, they would repeat this process up the mountainside, creating a giant staircase of fertile land. This was not just about creating flat space to plant seeds. It was a comprehensive solution to the brutal logic of mountains, where every downpour would simply wash the soil away, taking a season's hope with it. Each stone wall acted as a dam, stopping erosion in its tracks. Each level field became a miniature reservoir, capturing rainfall and holding it long enough to soak deep into the soil, rather than vanishing in a destructive torrent down the slope. The water was now a prisoner of the landscape, forced to nourish it. Nowhere was this mastery more breathtaking than in the Andes, the spine of the Inca Empire. Here, at altitudes where the air is thin and frosts are common, the Inca needed to feed millions. They engineered terraces that climbed thousands of feet, creating microclimates on every step. On lower, warmer terraces they grew maize. Higher up, they cultivated countless varieties of potato, a crop they domesticated to thrive in the cold. Their terrace walls were so perfectly fitted without mortar that many still stand centuries later, a testament to an understanding of stone and hydrology that feels almost supernatural. Across the Pacific, in the Philippine Cordilleras, another mountain civilization performed a similar miracle with a different staple. For over 2,000 years, the Ifugao people carved entire mountains into cascading steps for rice. Their terraces are often called the stairways to the sky, an intricate system that captures mountain spring water and guides it from the highest paddies down through a gentle, gravity-fed network to every field below. Each plot is both a rice field and a shallow pond, the water warming in the sun and creating ideal conditions for growth. This was agriculture as a form of landscape art, a partnership with the terrain so profound that it created sustainability for millennia. These terraced mountains did more than just produce food. They allowed human populations to expand vertically into realms once thought uninhabitable, turning barren slopes into the literal bedrock of civilization. They represent a philosophy, a recognition that you do not conquer a harsh environment by fighting it, but by listening to it and then carefully, patiently, persuading it to work with you. Yet, even the most magnificent terrace still relied on the rain falling from the sky. What if an empire wanted to free itself from that uncertainty entirely, to command water with such precision that the desert could bloom on a schedule? That required a final, audacious leap, a network of control so vast it would weave an entire region into a single, thirsty organism. But all the water in the world is useless if the soil itself grows tired. The greatest hidden threat to an arid empire wasn't a failed canal or a broken wheel, but a slow, silent theft happening right beneath the farmer's feet. With every harvest, crops like wheat and barley drew vital nutrients, especially nitrogen, from the earth. In a forgiving, rain-rich environment, natural processes might replenish this over time. But in a fragile desert oasis or a marginal hillside, this constant drain could turn fertile ground into sterile dust in just a few generations. The solution emerged not from a grand engineering project, but from patient observation. Early cultivators noticed something profound. A field left completely alone for a season, resting under the sun and wind, seemed to regain its strength. This practice, called fallowing, was the first step in a quiet revolution. It was an act of humility, an admission that the land, like any living thing, needed to breathe. By letting a field lie idle, moisture could accumulate deeper in the soil profile, and wild plants, though seen as weeds, would die and decompose, returning a trickle of organic matter back to the earth. It was a simple trade, sacrificing one season's yield to secure the next decade's harvest. This wisdom slowly evolved into something more sophisticated and powerful, a biological technology encoded in planting schedules. In medieval Europe, faced with dense populations and limited good land, this idea crystallized into systematic crop rotation. The two-field system divided all available land in half. One half would grow food while the other half lay fallow, and they would switch each year. This was a vast improvement over continuous cropping, but it still meant half the land was unproductive at any given time. Then came the three-field revolution. Now the land was divided into three large sections. One section grew a winter grain like wheat or rye. A second section grew a spring crop like oats, barley, or, most importantly, legumes, peas, beans, or lentils. The third section rested as fallow. The following year, each section would rotate its role. The genius was in the legumes. Farmers may not have known the word nitrogen, but they knew that planting beans somehow made the soil better for the wheat that followed. We now understand that legumes, through a miraculous symbiosis with bacteria in their root nodules, pull nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil, a natural fertilizer factory. This rotation created a virtuous cycle. The cereal grains fed the people, the legumes replenished the earth and also provided protein, and the fallow period allowed for deeper recovery. This system could boost overall food production by up to 50% compared to two-field farming. It transformed marginal European landscapes into stable, continuous breadbaskets that could support growing towns and cities. This was sustainability in its purest ancient form, a long-term contract with the land. It required a communal vision, planning not just for the next season, but for the next generation. The fallow field and the rotating crop were not signs of inactivity, but of profound activity happening beneath the surface, a hidden labor of microbial life and chemical restoration that made all the visible irrigation and terracing possible. It was the essential, slow heartbeat that kept the entire agricultural body alive, and it begs a final, haunting question. In our modern rush for constant maximum yield, what vital rhythms have we forgotten? What if the ultimate innovation isn't about extracting more, but about knowing when to step back and let the world restore itself? The most profound tools of an arid empire were not made of stone or wood, but of life itself. While engineers were mastering water, another group of quiet pioneers was engaged in a different kind of conversation, one that unfolded over countless growing seasons. They were not looking at the landscape but into the very heart of a plant, conducting a grand experiment in survival through selective breeding. Their question was simple yet revolutionary. Which of these wild grasses, these seemingly fragile shoots, holds the secret to enduring thirst? The answer would transform marginal lands into new homelands, and it began with a patient observation. In a field of wild grain, most plants might wither under a brutal sun, but a few individuals, by random genetic chance, would stand a little taller, their leaves a little greener, their roots probing a little deeper for hidden moisture. The ancient farmer, though they knew nothing of genetics, recognized this strength. They saved the seeds from these resilient survivors and planted them the next year. Season after season, generation after generation, this unconscious selection pressure sculpted the wild plant into a domesticated partner, one genetically tuned to scarcity. This was innovation at the cellular level, a slow, collaborative dance between human need and botanical potential. In the vast, sun-drenched Sahel region of Africa, this process gave birth to sorghum. Its wild ancestor was a tough grass, but through millennia of selection, it became a cereal powerhouse. Sorghum's genius is in its profound efficiency. It sends roots deep into the soil, mining water reserves that other plants cannot reach. Its leaves have a waxy coating that reduces water loss, and it can essentially pause its growth during the worst drought, waiting patiently for the next rain. This was not just a crop, it was a lesson in resilience written in DNA. Sorghum became the staple that supported kingdoms across West Africa, a reliable source of food and fodder that allowed communities to flourish where other grains would fail. Meanwhile, in the challenging environment between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, farmers faced a different adversary: salt. Irrigation, if not managed perfectly, could pull salts from deep in the earth to the surface, creating a toxic crust that killed most plants. Here, the miracle crop was barley. Through selective breeding, ancient Mesopotamians favored barley varieties that could tolerate these saline conditions. Barley became the hardy backbone of Sumerian and Babylonian agriculture, the grain that could produce a harvest even in fields slowly turning bitter. This was a genetic triumph every bit as critical as the construction of a canal. These drought-resistant and salt-tolerant crops were the essential biological counterparts to the grand irrigation works and terraces. The engineering moved the water, but these seeds knew what to do with it. They were the willing partners that made the immense human effort worthwhile, turning every precious drop into maximum nourishment. This silent breeding program allowed the frontier of agriculture to creep steadily outward into lands once deemed useless. Each new variety of resilient millet, each strain of hardy wheat, expanded the map of the possible. It meant a farming community could plant its roots in a drier valley, a rain shadow, a saline plain, and not just survive but thrive. This expansion of the agricultural frontier was the literal groundwork for empire, creating stable, food-producing regions in places that could then support roads, armies, and cities. The story of these seeds reminds us that the greatest innovations are sometimes the most invisible, a quiet pact between human patience and the adaptable genius of the living world. Yet even the most resilient seed needs a place to grow, and sometimes the most fertile ground must be invented from nothing. In the thin air of the valley of Mexico's high plateau, the Aztec people looked upon their new home, a vast lake surrounded by marshy shores and arid hills, and saw a paradox. Here was an immense body of water, yet little stable, arable land to feed a burgeoning city. Their solution was an act of pure architectural alchemy, turning the lake itself into soil. They built the Chinampa, the so-called floating gardens that were anything but adrift. The construction was a masterclass in layered engineering. First, farmers would weave enormous rectangular frames from the reeds that grew abundantly in the shallows. These frames were staked securely into the soft lakebed, creating a permanent enclosure in the water. Then began the slow, rich process of filling. They dredged nutrient-dense mud from the lake bottom, piling it layer upon layer into the reed corral. Crucially, they mixed in decaying aquatic vegetation, composting it right into the structure. This created a raised plot, an artificial island that sat just above the waterline, its base perpetually kissed by the lake. The genius was in the unseen mechanics. The porous soil acted like a sponge, drawing moisture upward through capillary action. The roots of crops planted in the Chinampa always had access to water, but never sat waterlogged. It was a self-irrigating, perfectly drained field. The surrounding canals between the garden plots served as aquatic highways for canoes carrying harvests, and as rich habitats for fish and waterfowl, adding protein to the diet. The fertility was staggering. Chinampa soil, constantly replenished with fresh organic muck and plant matter, never seemed to tire. Farmers could achieve an almost continuous cycle of cultivation, with some accounts suggesting up to 7 harvests in a single year by carefully staggering plantings of maize, beans, squash, and flowers. This was not merely farming, it was hyper-productive ecosystem design. These lush, geometric grids of green stretching for miles across Lake Texcoco became the true economic engine of Tenochtitlan. They supported a dense urban population that may have reached 200,000 people, feeding the artisans, merchants, and warriors of an imperial capital, often compared to Venice for its stunning network of canals and causeways. The Chinampa demonstrates a profound principle: that the ultimate agricultural innovation is not forcing an environment to conform to a blueprint, but learning to read its unique language and compose a new harmony within it. The Aztecs did not conquer their lake, they collaborated with it, weaving land from water and, in the process, building one of the most remarkable cities the world had ever seen. But water does not only flow in rivers or lie hidden in aquifers. In the vast, flat plains where no river runs and the water table lies deep beneath the earth, another relentless force sweeps across the land, one that could not be channeled, only captured. The answer to irrigation here came not from below, but from above, in the ceaseless movement of the air itself. The windmill transformed a challenge into an asset, turning the very breath of the open sky into a mechanical heartbeat for the fields. Its story begins not with water, but with grain in the high plains of Persia. There, as early as the 7th century, ingenious builders constructed vertical windmills with sails made of bundled reeds or cloth, set around a central vertical axle. As the wind pushed against these sails, the entire upper structure would rotate, turning millstones to grind flour. It was a brilliant application, but the true revolution came when this concept traveled westward, to places like the island of Crete and the arid plateaus of the Iberian Peninsula. Here, farmers and engineers faced a different problem. They did not need to grind grain as much as they needed to move vast quantities of water, to drain marshy lowlands for farming, or, more critically, to lift precious groundwater from deep wells up to the surface. So they adapted the windmill's core principle. They kept the vertical sails that caught the omnipresent wind, but instead of connecting the axle to a millstone, they connected it to a simple crank. That crank, in turn, drove a piston pump or a large, rotating scoop wheel. With every turn of the sails, the pump would lift a measured amount of water from the depths, pouring it into a waiting irrigation ditch. The sound of these early windmills was the sound of new land being born, a rhythmic creak and splash that announced the reclamation of wetlands and the awakening of parched soil. Their power was beautifully democratic, Unlike a noria, which was forever chained to a river's flow, a windmill could be built anywhere the wind blew steadily, especially in flat coastal regions and open steppes. It required no animal labor to operate, no community to man a Shaduf shift. Once built, it worked autonomously, day and night, fueled by a resource that was utterly free and renewable. This independence was transformative. It meant a single farmer or a small village could secure their own water supply, opening up tracts of land that were previously considered marginal or uninhabitable. In places like the plains of La Mancha in Spain, these windmills dotted the horizon, their slow-turning sails pumping life into the soil, supporting local crops and settlements, and contributing to a sturdy, decentralized form of food security. The windmill represented a final liberation in the ancient quest for water, proving that even in the absence of rivers, human ingenuity could partner with the elemental forces of the earth to draw forth abundance. It was a quiet, persistent monument to the idea that the solutions we need are often carried on the very winds we once merely endured. The windmill harnessed the open sky, but in the deepest deserts, the only safe place for water was in the earth's own embrace. Far to the east, along the sun-scorched rim of the Taklamakan Desert, a civilization faced a paradox of terrifying scale. Here in the Turpan Basin, one of the lowest and hottest places on Earth, summer temperatures could make the very air shimmer with heat, and rainfall was a forgotten dream. Yet beneath this blistering surface, a gift waited: meltwater from the distant Tian Shan Mountains, flowing silently through underground gravel beds. To reach it, the people of this region, primarily the Aika people, performed an act of geographical surgery so precise it mirrored the Persian Kanat, yet was born entirely of its own desperate necessity. They built the Terrace. At first glance, the Terrace and the Qanat are twins, a stunning case of parallel invention across vast distances. Both systems begin with a mother well, dug deep into the foothills to tap the hidden aquifer. Both rely on a gently sloping underground tunnel, carved backward for miles toward the settlement, with vertical access shafts lining its path for construction and maintenance. And both share the same brilliant purpose: to shield life-giving water from the evaporating fury of the desert sun. But look closer, and the Terrace reveals its own unique character, shaped by a specific and brutal environment. The Turpan Basin is not just dry, it is an oven with a surface that could literally bake away a canal in days. This made the underground channel not just efficient, but absolutely non-negotiable for survival. The engineering reflected a deep, localized wisdom. The tunnels were often lined with clay and sometimes even with bricks to prevent collapse in the loose soil. The spacing of the vertical shafts was meticulously planned to ensure proper ventilation and to allow teams of diggers, working in shifts from multiple points, to connect their sections with astonishing accuracy, all without modern surveying tools. It was a communal project spanning generations, a testament to a shared understanding that no single family could conquer this landscape alone. The result of this hidden labor was nothing short of miraculous. Where the Terrace channel surfaced, oasis cities bloomed like emeralds in a sea of sand. The most famous of these was Turpan itself. Here, the Terrace water, cool and clean from its subterranean journey, was channeled into a sprawling network of open canals and private courtyards. It fed the roots of vineyards that produced grapes so sweet and renowned they became legendary along the Silk Road. Orchards of apricots, melons, and pomegranates thrived, creating a lush, shaded world that stood in defiant contrast to the surrounding desert of the Taklamakan, a place whose name ominously translates to the place of no return. The Terrace did more than just grow fruit, it grew culture and commerce. It made Turpan a vital caravanserai, a lush pit stop where silk, spice, and ideas could be exchanged in the shade of grape arbors, all thanks to the invisible rivers flowing beneath the travelers' feet. The existence of both the Kanat and the Terrace, separated by thousands of miles and developed independently, speaks to a profound universal truth in the human story. When faced with the same existential threat, aridity, brilliant minds in different corners of the world often arrive at the same elegant solution. It reveals a shared human instinct to look not just to the horizon for salvation, but to dig deep, to listen to the quiet secrets of the earth, and to build resilience from the ground up. This parallel invention is not a coincidence, it is a signature of intelligent adaptation. It shows that the drive to make a desert bloom is written into our collective spirit, a quiet, stubborn refusal to accept the map of the possible as it first appears. Yet that hidden river and every canal it fed carried a quiet, invisible poison. For all the genius of lifting water to the desert, irrigation in arid lands has a devastating twin, a consequence as inevitable as evaporation itself. When water is applied to a field, it does not simply vanish into the plants. Much of it evaporates from the soil surface or is transpired by the crops, leaving behind every mineral and salt it dissolved on its journey. Over seasons, over years, these salts accumulate in the root zone, creating a toxic crust that chokes the life from the very soil meant to sustain an empire. This was the silent enemy that no grand canal could defeat, an enemy that historians believe contributed to the long, slow decline of some Mesopotamian societies, where once fertile fields turned white and barren. To farm in the desert was not just a battle for water, but a perpetual war against the salt it left behind. The most ancient farmers may not have understood the chemistry, but they could not ignore the results. They watched as yields gradually dwindled in fields that had been productive for generations, as seedlings wilted in soil that looked healthy but held a hidden poison. Their first innovations were born of necessity and observation. In some regions, they learned to amend the earth with substances like gypsum. When mixed into saline soil, gypsum helps to break apart the tight, crusty structure, allowing water to penetrate more deeply and carry some of the salts away. It was a palliative measure, a treatment for the symptom. A more profound solution came from the seeds themselves, through the patient selection of salt-tolerant crops we touched on earlier, like barley. By favoring the hardiest strains, farmers could eke out a harvest even as their land grew sicker, buying precious time. But the true cornerstone of ancient salinity management was a practice that seems counterintuitive, a deliberate waste of the most precious resource. It is called leaching. This required a deep, systemic understanding of the soil profile and a willingness to use water not just for growth, but for purification. The process was a careful, calculated flood. Farmers would periodically inundate their fields with a large, controlled surge of irrigation water, far more than the crops needed. This excess water would dissolve the accumulated salts and then critically percolate down through the soil, carrying the toxic load below the root zone and into deeper drainage layers. For this to work, everything had to be precisely coordinated. The soil needed good natural drainage, or else the salt-laden water would simply pool and evaporate, making the problem worse. Often, this meant constructing subsurface drains made of stone or ceramic tile to actively channel the brine away. It was a water-intensive reset button for the land. This transformed agriculture into the most delicate of balancing acts. A community had to master a dual calculation, providing just enough water for the season's crops to thrive, while also budgeting a significant surplus for the essential, life-preserving flush. It required foresight, collective water rights, and an institutional memory that spanned generations. The administrator who allocated water was not just distributing a resource for food, but practicing a form of environmental medicine, prescribing the correct dose to heal the land itself. This was sustainability in its most advanced ancient form, a recognition that true abundance meant managing not just the visible flow of water, but the invisible chemistry it left behind. The ghost of this ancient challenge haunts us today, from the shrinking Aral Sea to struggling farmlands worldwide, reminding us that the greatest threats are often the ones we cannot see until the land itself begins to whisper its final warning. That invisible chemistry demanded an authority. A single farmer could dig a small ditch, but a civilization needed 1,000 ditches, perfectly aligned, stretching toward a distant horizon. This leap from individual effort to collective achievement marks the birth of a new kind of power. The state emerges not just as a ruler, but as the ultimate coordinator of water. In the sun-baked plains of ancient Sumer, the story of civilization is written in the mud of its canals. To divert the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates rivers, communities had to agree on a monumental task. Someone had to design the channels, deciding which fields would be watered first and which would wait. Someone had to organize the thousands of laborers needed to dig and dredge season after season. And when disputes inevitably arose between upstream and downstream villages, someone had to settle them with a force beyond argument. That someone was the temple and later the palace. The priest-kings of Sumer did not just command armies, they commanded the water calendar. Their authority grew directly from their perceived role as intermediaries with the gods who controlled the floods. By managing the irrigation schedule, they held the literal keys to life and death for every farm in the region. The agricultural surplus their system created, the vast stores of grain in temple granaries, then funded more projects, more administrators, and more soldiers. It was a perfect, self-reinforcing loop. Control water, produce food, consolidate power, then use that power to control even more water. This hydraulic society created the world's first detailed legal codes. The famous Code of Hammurabi, etched in stone nearly 4,000 years ago, is not just about theft or marriage. It is, in many ways, a water law. Several of its clauses meticulously outline the responsibilities of farmers regarding their canals and ditches. One law states that if a man is too careless to strengthen the dike of his field, and the water breaks through and floods his neighbor's crop, he must repay his neighbor in grain. Another holds a man liable if he opens his irrigation channel and lets the water ravage a field next to his. These were not minor property disputes, they were matters of communal survival, codified by a central authority to maintain the fragile order upon which all depended. We see the same bureaucratic machinery in pharaonic Egypt, where the annual Nile flood was a national event. Scribes fanned out across the kingdom to survey fields, calculate expected yields based on the flood's height, and determine tax quotas. The entire economy, the very rhythm of life, was orchestrated by a state that had mastered the art of predicting and distributing a river's gift. This symbiosis between political power and water management reshaped the human story. It turned chieftains into kings and villages into cities. The ability to feed thousands from once barren land allowed for specialization, for armies that could march on full stomachs, for artisans and scribes who could build and record. The state did not invent the Shaduf or the seed, but it scaled them into empire. It transformed local ingenuity into a geopolitical force, proving that the true catalyst for turning a desert into a breadbasket was not just technology, but the organized will of a society speaking with one voice. And once that voice commanded the waters, what new frontiers of ambition did it dare to dream? The silent war against salt was fought in the plains, but in the jagged mountains of southern Jordan, an entire civilization waged a far more dramatic campaign. They did not just manage water, they declared war on the sky itself, capturing its violent, fleeting generosity with a precision that feels almost supernatural. The Nabateans were nomadic traders who looked upon the sheer, red rock canyons of Wadi Musa and saw not a barren fortress, but a perfect hydrological machine. Their secret was a radical philosophy to treat water not as a resource to be found, but as a temporary army to be captured, disciplined, and put to work. Their weapon was the landscape. They understood that their desert received almost no gentle rain, but was occasionally savaged by sudden, terrifying flash floods. These were not blessings, but destructive torrents that could scour a canyon clean in minutes. The Nabatean genius was to see these floods not as a threat, but as the only supply convoy they would ever get. So they built a city designed to intercept it. Petra is famous for its tombs carved into rose-colored cliffs, but its true wonder lies in what you cannot easily see. The Nabateans transformed the entire mountainous catchment area, hundreds of square miles, into a vast, sloping collection plate. They constructed an intricate network of diversion dams and stone channels high in the surrounding hills. When a storm hit, these channels would intercept the raging runoff and funnel it away from the vulnerable city center, instead guiding it into a meticulously planned system. The water was then tamed through a series of settling tanks, where silt would drop out, before being directed into a labyrinth of underground cisterns carved directly into the bedrock. Some of these reservoirs could hold millions of gallons, but storage was only half the battle. Distribution was the masterstroke. The Nabateans engineered a pressurized ceramic pipeline system, a skeleton of hollowed-out stone blocks and terracotta pipes that ran beneath their city's streets. This network used gravity to deliver clean, cool water directly to public fountains, lavish private gardens, and even to the upper stories of their multi-level homes. For a visitor arriving from the desolate trail, the sight of Petra would have been disorienting, a vision of lush greenery, splashing fountains, and thriving orchards erupting from a stone desert. This hydrological mastery supported a population that may have reached 30,000 at its peak. Their agriculture mirrored this precision. On the surrounding plateaus, they built extensive terraces, not just to create flat land, but to slow erosion and capture soil during those same flash floods. They practiced careful crop rotation and even used ground stone mulch to retain precious soil moisture around the roots of their vines and fruit trees. Water was their currency. This absolute control over the one element everyone else lacked is what allowed them to dominate the lucrative incense trade routes for centuries. Caravans carrying frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia to the Mediterranean had no choice but to stop at Petra. Here, in the middle of nowhere, they could find abundant water for thousands of camels and men, safe storage for goods, and a powerful state that guaranteed security for a price. The Nabateans proved that in an arid world, hydrological engineering was not a municipal service. It was a strategic weapon. They built an empire not on gold or soldiers alone, but on the disciplined capture of a fleeting storm, turning the desert's own violence into the foundation of legendary wealth. Rome's heart beat in Italy, but its stomach was filled by North Africa. The sprawling metropolis of Rome, with its population swelling toward 1 million souls, faced a logistical nightmare. The fertile fields of the Italian peninsula could never hope to feed such a colossal urban center. The empire's solution was to look across the Mediterranean to the sun-baked coasts of what is now Tunisia and Libya. This was not a land of obvious abundance. It was a dry, challenging landscape, yet the Romans saw its potential with the cold clarity of engineers and administrators. They did not just farm this province, they industrialized it, turning it into the single most important economic asset the empire possessed, its true breadbasket. The transformation began not with a plow, but with a surveyor's rod and a gridded map. The Romans imposed order upon the land through a system called centuriation. Imagine the entire countryside divided into a perfect chessboard of square plots, each measuring approximately 700 meters on a side. Roads and irrigation canals were laid out along these grid lines with military precision. This was not merely about property lines, it was about control, efficiency, and scale. It allowed the state to parcel out conquered land to veterans or wealthy investors, creating vast estates known as latifundia. These were not family farms, they were agricultural factories, sometimes spanning thousands of acres, worked by large teams of enslaved individuals and managed by professional overseers. The grid made everything predictable, from tax collection to the movement of harvests to the ports. Water, as always, was the limiting factor. The Romans addressed this with their signature blend of brute force and elegant engineering. They built monumental reservoirs like the vast cisterns of Carthage, which could capture and store seasonal rainfall. They constructed long-distance aqueducts to bring spring water from the mountains down to the coastal plains. But perhaps their most impactful innovation was the systematic use of the Noria and the Archimedes screw on a staggering scale. These water-lifting devices, now powered by animals or teams of workers, drew water from wells and channels, enabling irrigation far beyond the reach of simple gravity-fed ditches. This hydraulic network turned marginal land into prime real estate for two specific, incredibly valuable crops: olive trees and wheat. The choice was strategic genius. Olive trees, with their deep roots and tolerance for dry conditions, were perfectly suited to the North African climate. They provided not just food, but oil, a commodity used for cooking, lighting, and even personal hygiene. The Romans planted them in endless, orderly rows, creating seas of silvery green leaves that stretched to the horizon. Between these groves, they sowed vast fields of wheat. This was grain production on a level the world had scarcely seen. The annual harvest was so immense that it became the cornerstone of Roman political stability. The state guaranteed a monthly grain dole for hundreds of thousands of the city's poorer citizens, a social safety net made possible entirely by the ships crossing from North Africa. Historians estimate that by the 2nd century, the province of Africa Proconsularis was shipping enough grain to feed the city of Rome for 8 months out of every year. This system created a dangerous, profound dependency. The North African granary was the empire's lifeline, but it was a lifeline stretched taut across hundreds of miles of open sea. The prosperity of Rome and the peace of its restless populace now hinged on the weather patterns of a distant coast, the security of the shipping lanes, and the political loyalty of a provincial elite an ocean away. When that lifeline was threatened, whether by rebellion, piracy, or later, by the Vandal conquest of North Africa in the 5th century, the entire Western Empire went into convulsions. The loss of this agricultural heartland was a blow from which the city of Rome never truly recovered. The story of the North African granary is the ultimate lesson in imperial overreach and fragile supply chains. It shows that the greatest strength of a hydraulic empire can become its most catastrophic vulnerability, a lesson written not in stone, but in the silent, fertile soil of a conquered land. Rome's dependency on a single, distant breadbasket revealed a profound vulnerability, but another empire would soon show a different path to abundance. In the wake of the Arab expansions, a new agricultural philosophy took root, one that treated farming not as a matter of tradition, but as a science to be perfected. From the 8th to the 13th centuries, a vast region stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the Indus River basin became the stage for a transformation so profound, historians now call it the Islamic Green Revolution. This was not merely about conquest, but about connection. As the Islamic world expanded, its scholars and administrators acted as intellectual curators, deliberately seeking out the agricultural wisdom of every culture they encountered. They translated and studied ancient Greek texts on botany, Persian manuals on Kanat construction, and Indian treatises on water management. This was a conscious, systematic effort to compile the world's knowledge of the land. The result was a new genre of literature, the detailed agricultural manual. These were not simple farmers' almanacs. They were encyclopedic works that classified soil into dozens of distinct types, each with recommended crops and treatments. They provided intricate instructions for grafting fruit trees to produce better yields, outlined complex multi-year crop rotation schedules to maintain fertility, and offered precise engineering guidelines for building and maintaining norias, water wheels, and underground channels. Farming had become an applied science guided by observation, experimentation, and written record. This scientific approach met its perfect partner in a policy of deliberate botanical exchange. Along the bustling trade routes that now crisscrossed the empire, travelers carried more than silk and spices. They carried living plants. Agricultural stations were established to test and adapt new crops. Citrus fruits like oranges and lemons, originally from Southeast Asia, were introduced to the Mediterranean basin. Cotton from India and sugar cane from Persia were carefully trialed in the arid climates of the Middle East and North Africa. The success of these transplants hinged on that same scientific mastery of water. Engineers refined the ancient technologies of the past, creating integrated systems that combined Kanats for groundwater with norias for river water and elaborate canal networks for distribution. They developed improved water lifting devices and more efficient irrigation schedules that minimized waste. This fusion of global botany and localized hydrological engineering created agricultural mosaics of incredible productivity. In the valleys of Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus terraced hillsides were lined with citrus groves and irrigated fields of rice and sugarcane. In the gardens of Baghdad, botanists cultivated hundreds of varieties of roses and fruit trees, their growth fueled by water from the Tigris. The surplus generated by this green revolution was staggering. It fed the growth of magnificent cities like Cordoba and Cairo, supporting populations that dwarfed those of contemporary Europe. It funded universities, libraries, and observatories. The wealth from cotton and sugar production fueled vast trading networks, while the dietary improvement from new fruits and vegetables supported larger, healthier populations. This period demonstrates a powerful truth. The most sustainable agricultural transformations are not born from isolation, but from the cross-pollination of ideas. The Islamic Green Revolution was a testament to what happens when curiosity is systematized, when the best ideas from across the world are gathered, tested, and adapted to local conditions with scientific rigor. It showed that feeding a civilization requires more than just water and soil. It requires the free flow of knowledge. And as this network of exchange hummed with activity, a question began to form in the minds of its scholars. If they could engineer the land and the water, could they also engineer the very plants themselves, not through selection, but through something more direct? The answer would lie in a practice so subtle, it worked not on the plant but on the world immediately surrounding it. Their mastery of water was a science, but their mastery of the land became an art form. While scholars in Baghdad were compiling their encyclopedias, another civilization, a world away and utterly isolated, was performing an engineering miracle of its own. In the blistering heart of the Sonoran Desert, where summer temperatures can melt the very air into a shimmering haze, the Hohokam people looked at the erratic flow of the Salt and Gila rivers and saw a blueprint for permanence. With nothing but stone tools, woven baskets, and an immense collective will, they embarked on a project that would reshape their world. They began to dig. The canals they built were not simple ditches. They were feats of precise hydraulic engineering, some stretching for over 20 miles across the flat desert plain. The builders had to calculate a slope so gentle that water would flow steadily for that entire distance, neither pooling nor rushing too fast to erode the channels. They constructed headgates to control the diversion from the river and built massive brush and earth dams to manage the flow. The scale is almost incomprehensible. By the time their network reached its peak around the year 1300, it wove a vast web of waterways totaling hundreds of miles in length, transforming a sun-scorched basin into a green grid of fertile fields. This system fed crops of maize, beans, and squash, supporting large, permanent villages with populations in the thousands, complete with central plazas and ceremonial ball courts. Yet here lies the profound mystery. Archaeologists have found little evidence of the kind of rigid, top-down hierarchy we saw in Sumer or Egypt. There are no grand palaces, no storerooms of centralized wealth, no evidence of a king or a pharaoh who commanded this water. So how did they do it? The answer may be in the canals themselves. Managing such a system required incredible cooperation, but perhaps it was a cooperation born of consensus rather than coercion. Decision-making might have rested with councils of elders or village leaders who negotiated water rights and organized the seasonal cleaning and repair of the channels. Their society may have been held together by a shared understanding that the water belonged to the community and that every family's survival depended on their neighbors. It was a hydraulic democracy, a testament to what can be achieved without a single, overwhelming central authority. But even this remarkable social contract could not withstand every force. After flourishing for more than 1,000 years, the Hohokam culture began to fade. Their great canals slowly silted up, the villages grew quieter, and by around the year 1450, the landscape they had so carefully engineered was largely abandoned. Why? The clues point to a slow, mounting pressure. The very success of their irrigation may have sown the seeds of decline. Centuries of watering in a hot, dry climate would have steadily concentrated salts in the soil, a creeping toxicity that gradually strangled their crops. At the same time, the climate itself may have shifted. Tree ring data suggests the region experienced severe and prolonged droughts during the period of their departure. A less reliable river, combined with increasingly bitter earth, could have pushed their brilliant system past its breaking point. The society that had mastered water could not master the silent chemistry it left behind or the changing mood of the sky. Their story did not end, however. When Spanish explorers arrived centuries later, they found the Pima people farming along many of the same waterways, using and maintaining the ancient Hohokam canals. The knowledge of the desert, the understanding of how to live with its harsh generosity, had been passed down, a legacy written not in books but in the flow of water through stone-lined channels. The Hohokam enigma forces us to reconsider what we mean by civilization. They achieved a scale of environmental engineering rivaling the old world, yet they did it their own way, suggesting that the human impulse to make the desert bloom can take many forms, from the command of an emperor to the consensus of a community. Their empty canals are a silent monument to both our ingenuity and our fragility, a reminder that every pact with a river is a gamble with time. While the Hohokam canals were succumbing to salt, another, quieter revolution was taking root beneath the surface elsewhere. It did not rely on grand engineering, but on a microscopic partnership hidden in the soil. The humble legume plants like lentils, chickpeas, and alfalfa were the unsung heroes of ancient fertility, a biological technology that turned air into food. Their secret lies in their roots. If you could gently pull one of these plants from the earth, you might see tiny, pinkish nodules clinging to the root hairs. Inside each one, a species of bacteria called rhizobia has made a home. In a perfect act of symbiosis, the plant provides the bacteria with sugars from photosynthesis, and in return, the bacteria perform a kind of alchemy. They take inert nitrogen gas from the air, which most plants cannot use, and convert it into ammonia, a form of nitrogen that acts as a fundamental building block for plant growth. This process is called nitrogen fixation, and it is the closest thing to natural magic in the agricultural world. Ancient farmers, of course, knew nothing of bacteria or chemical formulas. Their genius was one of pure, patient observation. They noticed that fields which had grown beans or peas one season would produce a better harvest of wheat or barley the next. They saw the pattern and they acted upon it, weaving legumes into their crop rotations long before science could explain why it worked. This practice was especially vital in the arid and semi-arid regions where many empires took root. In these landscapes, organic matter from decaying plants accumulates slowly under the harsh sun. The soil is often thin and poor. Adding manure from animals was helpful, but that supply was limited. The legume offered a direct, renewable source of fertility, pulled literally from the air itself. It was a way to feed the soil so the soil could feed the civilization. The story of alfalfa, known in the ancient world as lucerne, illustrates this power perfectly. Originating in Central Asia, alfalfa is a deep-rooted, drought-tolerant legume. The Islamic agricultural revolution recognized its immense value not just as a high-quality fodder for horses and livestock, but as a soil regenerator. Farmers would plant alfalfa in a field for a year or two. Its deep roots broke up compacted earth and brought up nutrients from below, while its rhizobia partners quietly enriched the topsoil with nitrogen. After the alfalfa was plowed under, that field would be bursting with fertility, ready to support several seasons of demanding cereal crops like wheat or barley. This created a beautiful, sustainable loop. The alfalfa fed the animals that provided labor, milk, and meat. The animals produced manure that further fertilized the fields. And the alfalfa itself prepared the ground for the grains that fed the human population. It was a closed system of nourishment that maximized every drop of water and every inch of sun-baked earth. This understanding transformed marginal lands into productive ones. Across the Mediterranean and the Middle East, the integration of legumes into farming cycles allowed communities to farm the same plots century after century without the catastrophic soil exhaustion that doomed other societies. It was a form of ecological wisdom, a recognition that the health of a field depended on an invisible network of life beneath our feet. The farmer who planted lentils was not just growing dinner, they were depositing vitality into the earth's own bank, ensuring the next generation would inherit a living soil, not a dead one. This silent partnership between plant and microbe may be the most profound agricultural innovation of all, because it asked for nothing but a seed and a little time, offering in return the very foundation of life itself. But the partnership with legumes was a slow, patient rhythm of the soil. To truly expand an empire's reach, farmers needed a new kind of partner, one that could work tirelessly under the desert sun. The answer walked on four hooves and pulled in a steady, endless circle. The transition from the human-powered Shaduf to animal-driven irrigation was a quiet revolution in capacity, a fundamental shift from what a family could manage to what a small estate could achieve. The technology that embodied this leap was the Sakia. Imagine a simple wooden gearbox, a masterpiece of practical mechanics. A vertical pole is connected to a horizontal beam, to which a donkey or an ox is harnessed. As the animal plods in its eternal circle, it turns the horizontal beam. This motion, through a set of precisely carved wooden gears, is transferred to a vertical wheel positioned over a deep well. Attached to this wheel is a continuous chain of pottery jars or a belt of wooden buckets. With every rotation, empty containers dip into the water below, are lifted to the top, and tip their contents into a stone channel that flows toward the fields. It was a perpetual motion machine fueled by hay and grain. The genius of the Sakia was its relentless consistency. A single animal could lift water from depths far greater than a human could manage with a shaduf, and it could do so for hours without rest. This simple gear system amplified muscle power, turning the slow, strong walk of a beast into a continuous, reliable flow of life for the crops. The impact was transformative. A farmer with a Sakia could now irrigate not just a small vegetable plot, but several acres of land. This new scale of water access made previously marginal land incredibly valuable. It enabled the widespread cultivation of thirsty, high-value perennial crops. Across the arid landscapes of Ptolemaic Egypt and later Roman Spain, the sakia was the engine behind vast new olive groves, vineyards, and orchards of figs and dates. These were not just subsistence foods, they were cash crops for trade, the foundation of a market-oriented agricultural economy. The rhythmic creak of the sakia's gears became the sound of rural wealth creation, a mechanical heartbeat that allowed agriculture to climb out of the river valleys and onto the higher, drier plains. This was the true dawn of farm mechanization, a critical step between human labor and the wind or steam power that would come much later. It redefined the relationship between farmer, animal, and land. The donkey walking its circle was no longer just a beast of burden. It was a component in a machine, its biological energy efficiently converted into hydraulic work. The sakia set a powerful precedent, proving that abundance in an arid world could be engineered, that clever gearing could multiply effort and turn a well into a fountain of economic possibility. It asked a new question of the landscape, not just where the water was, but how its lifting could be automated to free human hands for other tasks. And as this idea took root, a more ambitious question followed. If one animal could turn a wheel to lift water, what could an entire river do? The river could turn a wheel, but the desert demanded a fortress of life. In the endless sea of sand, the oasis stands as a defiant island of green, a testament not to luck but to profound design. This is not a natural accident. It is a meticulously engineered ecosystem, the ultimate expression of integrated agricultural innovation. It begins with a single, secure water source, a spring, a well, or the terminal outlet of a Kanat. From that precious point, life expands outward in deliberate, concentric circles, a living blueprint for survival. At the very center, towering over all, stands the date palm. This tree is the keystone, the architectural pillar of the entire system. Its high, spreading canopy of fronds casts a deep, moving shade that cools the air and, most critically, dramatically reduces evaporation from the soil and water channels below. In its shelter, a microclimate is born. Directly beneath and around the palms, farmers plant fruit trees like citrus, pomegranates, and figs. These secondary trees thrive in the filtered light and protected humidity. Further out, in the dappled sun that reaches the ground, lie the vegetable gardens and plots for staple grains. Here, crops like onions, melons, beans, and wheat can grow without being scorched by the full fury of the desert sun. Finally, on the outermost ring, where conditions are harsher, farmers cultivate hardy fodder crops like alfalfa to feed the livestock that power the system. This layered design is a masterpiece of water use efficiency. Every drop is made to work multiple times. The water nourishes the date palm, whose canopy then conserves moisture for the trees below, which in turn create conditions for the vegetables. Nothing is wasted. The date palm itself is a marvel of provision. Its fruit is a dense source of calories and sugar, easily stored and traded. Its wood and leaves are used for building and weaving. Its very presence creates the possibility for everything else. These oases became hubs of incredible biodiversity and agricultural experimentation. Travelers and traders brought new seeds from distant lands, and oasis gardeners, protected within their green walls, would trial new varieties of grapes, apricots, or spices, seeing what might thrive in their carefully managed world. They were living laboratories of polyculture, where dozens of species coexisted and supported one another in a tight, sustainable loop. More than just farms, these oases were vital way stations, the beating hearts of desert trade routes. A caravan crossing the emptiness knew that at the next oasis they could find water, fresh food, shade, and a place to rest and repair. The oasis was thus both a refuge and a nexus of exchange, where goods, ideas, and agricultural knowledge were passed along with the dates and the water. This ancient model of intensive, layered cultivation shows us that the most productive systems are not vast monocultures, but diverse, interconnected communities of plants, each playing a specific role in a grander design. It is a lesson in working with the logic of an environment, of using structure and symbiosis to create abundance where none seemed possible. The climate that built these empires was never a permanent stage. For all their engineering brilliance, the civilizations of the arid world performed on a shifting, unstable platform. Their story is not one of linear triumph, but of a constant, high-stakes negotiation with a climate that refused to stay still. We see this in the long, patient rhythms of the Earth itself, periods like the medieval warm period, when from roughly the year 900 to 1300, many regions experienced milder temperatures and more reliable rainfall. This climatic window may have helped fuel the agricultural expansions of Europe and the golden ages of distant cultures, but it was followed by the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long stretch of cooler, more erratic weather that began around the 1300s and stretched into the 19th century. This was not a single event, but a roller coaster of unpredictable growing seasons, early frosts, and altered rainfall patterns. For societies living on the razor's edge of aridity, these shifts were not mere inconveniences. They were existential threats that demanded immediate, often desperate, adaptation. Consider the ancestral pueblones, once known as the Anasazi, in the high deserts of the American Southwest. For centuries, they thrived, building intricate cliff dwellings and vast networks of communities. Their success was built on a deep understanding of a marginal environment. They developed sophisticated water catchment systems, carving channels into bedrock to direct every precious drop of runoff from mesa tops into terraced gardens below. They positioned their fields to maximize shade and retain moisture. But when the climate turned against them, when a series of prolonged, severe droughts gripped the region in the late 13th century, their intricate systems met their limit. The rains did not come, and the carefully captured runoff dwindled to nothing. Faced with this relentless change, they made a profound choice. They began to leave. Over generations, they abandoned the magnificent stone cities they had built, migrating to areas with more reliable water sources, like the Rio Grande Valley. This was not a collapse of ingenuity, but its ultimate expression, the flexibility to walk away from a beloved homeland when the land itself could no longer sustain their way of life. It was adaptation in its most difficult form. A similar story of climate and consequence unfolded far to the south, in the lush rainforests that seemed the opposite of a desert. The Maya civilization reached astonishing heights, with towering pyramids and bustling cities supported by intensive agriculture, but their environment held a hidden fragility. Beneath the canopy, the tropical soil is often thin and nutrient-poor. The Maya mastered this challenge through complex water management, creating vast reservoirs and canal systems to store water for the dry season. Their entire societal rhythm was synchronized with the rains. When those rains became less reliable during periods of extended drought linked to broader climatic shifts, the pressure on their system became immense. Reservoirs evaporated, crops failed. The social contract, built on the promise of water and harvest, began to fray. While their decline was multifaceted, involving many social and political factors, the failure of their water infrastructure during these dry periods was a critical blow. It revealed that even in a seemingly water-rich region, the mastery of hydrology was a fragile achievement, one that could unravel when the climate deviated from the expected pattern. These historical echoes tell us something vital. The agricultural innovations we have marveled at, the Kanats and terraces and windmills, were rarely born in times of plenty. They were forged in the crucible of scarcity during periods of stress when the old ways no longer worked. A prolonged drought might force a community to dig their well deeper, inspiring the technology for the Sakya. A shift in river flow could compel the redesign of an entire canal network, leading to more efficient distribution. Climate variability was the relentless teacher, and human ingenuity was the student, constantly tested and forced to evolve. This dynamic interplay means there was never a final, permanent victory over the desert. Each generation inherited not just a system of fields and canals, but a covenant with an unpredictable sky. Their legacy is not one of static control, but of resilient adaptation, a reminder that the true measure of a civilization may not be how it builds in times of calm, but how it rebuilds, rethinks, and endures when the world itself begins to change. That covenant with the sky was written in the language of seeds. While empires rose and fell on their mastery of water, another, quieter form of power was on the move, carried in saddlebags and ship hulls along the dusty arteries of the world. The real treasure of the Silk Road was not always silk or spice, but a living cargo that could transform a continent. This was the slow-motion revolution of agricultural diffusion, a global conversation where the most valuable idea exchanged was how to make a new land feel like home. Think of a caravan winding through the Pamir Mountains. Among the bolts of cloth and bundles of incense, a trader might carry a few precious cuttings of a citrus tree, their roots carefully wrapped in damp cloth. These fruits, originally from the jungles of Southeast Asia, were a luxury, a rare treat for distant courts, but their journey did not end in a palace garden. Observant farmers in Persia and later the Mediterranean world saw something more. They noted the trees' evergreen leaves, their tolerance for a variety of soils, and their thirst that could be managed with careful irrigation. Through patient experimentation, they adapted cultivation techniques, grafting superior branches onto hardy rootstock and integrating the trees into their existing oasis and terrace systems. The orange and the lemon were no longer exotic curiosities. They became pillars of a new, diversified agriculture around the Mediterranean basin, adding vital vitamin C to diets and creating lucrative new products. Similarly, cotton began its life as a plant native to the Indian subcontinent. For millennia, it was spun and woven there into fabrics of legendary lightness. As Islamic trade networks expanded, cotton traveled westward, but so did the entire knowledge system required to grow it. The plant thrived in hot, sunny climates, but it was notoriously thirsty. Its adoption across the Middle East and North Africa was only possible because it arrived hand in hand with the advanced hydraulic engineering of the Islamic Green Revolution. Farmers now had the sophisticated water-lifting devices and canal management skills to meet the crop's demands. Cotton did not just bring new clothing, it catalyzed entire industries from dyeing to weaving together economies across arid zones from the Nile to the Indus. This exchange was never a one-way street. Centuries later, the Columbian Exchange unleashed a tidal wave of botanical change. Two crops from the Americas, maize and potatoes, would utterly reshape the Old World's relationship with marginal land. Maize or corn was a gift of staggering versatility. It could grow in a wider range of altitudes and soils than traditional European grains like wheat. It produced more calories per acre, and its tall stalks could be used for fodder and fuel. Suddenly, hillsides and plots once considered too poor for wheat could be brought into production, pushing the agricultural frontier outward and supporting population booms. The potato, however, was the true revolutionary. Here was a crop that could flourish in the cold, thin soils of upland regions where little else would grow. It was a nutritional powerhouse, providing substantial calories, vitamins, and minerals from a small plot of land. In places like Ireland and the highlands of Central Europe, the potato allowed populations to expand into previously inhospitable areas, creating a new kind of food security from below the ground. Its adoption was a quiet, grassroots transformation that altered the demographic map of a continent. This global relay race of seeds and knowledge underscores a profound truth. No civilization invented resilience in isolation. The ability to turn a desert or a mountainside into a breadbasket was a collective human achievement pieced together across continents and centuries. A drought-resistant millet from Africa might find a new home in the arid plains of China. A water management technique from Persia might be adapted to the terraces of the Andes. Pilgrims, soldiers, explorers, and enslaved individuals all became accidental agronomists, carrying the memory of a familiar plant and the hope it could root itself in a new world. This cross-pollination of agricultural wisdom was the ultimate risk mitigation strategy. By diversifying the portfolio of crops they could rely on, societies became less vulnerable to the failure of any single one. A bad year for wheat might be offset by a good harvest of sorghum or potatoes. This botanical diversity, woven into the landscape by long-distance trade, built a deeper, more robust kind of abundance. It reminds us that the borders on a map are often meaningless to a seed carried by the wind, or in the pocket of a traveler dreaming of a harvest under a foreign sun. The water that fed the fields also sculpted the soul of a society. When survival hinges on a shared ditch, the community itself becomes the most vital crop. This collective dependency forged intricate social codes, ones where water law was not a minor regulation, but the very bedrock of justice and identity. In countless desert villages, the most respected figure was often the watermaster, an individual entrusted with the sacred schedule of opening and closing canal gates. Their decisions, based on ancient custom and careful observation, determined whose fields would drink and whose would wait. Disputes were settled not by distant kings, but by councils of elders who understood the land's thirst firsthand. This ingrained a powerful ethos of fairness and mutual obligation, a cultural understanding that your neighbor's parched field was a prelude to your own. The rhythm of life itself bent to the irrigation cycle. The annual cleaning of the canals was not a chore but a festival. Entire communities would turn out, transforming backbreaking labor into a celebration of shared purpose, accompanied by music, food, and storytelling. The first release of water into the main channel after a long dry season was a moment of collective joy, often sanctified by religious ceremony. Deities of rivers and rain were worshipped not as abstract forces, but as partners in this delicate enterprise. The agricultural calendar, marked by planting, flooding, and harvest, gave structure to the year and inspired art, poetry, and myth. This cultural flourishing was made possible by the sheer abundance the engineered landscape produced. For the first time, not every pair of hands was needed in the fields. The surplus of grain and fruit from a single irrigated acre could feed many. This allowed for specialization, the birth of distinct social classes. Scribes emerged to record water allotments and harvest yields. Priests officiated the ceremonies that blessed the water. Soldiers protected the vital canal heads from rivals. Artisans freed from subsistence farming could weave finer textiles, throw exquisite pottery, or carve the stone for temples. The city of Babylon, with its hanging gardens and towering ziggurats, was not built by farmers alone, but by the economic engine of irrigated plenty. Yet this same system cast long shadows of inequality. The control of water was the ultimate source of power, and it could concentrate in the hands of a few. The temple or palace that managed the regional reservoir effectively held the keys to life. They could demand labor, taxes, or loyalty in exchange for water access. A stark hierarchy could emerge between the landowning elite who dictated the flow and the landless laborers who maintained it, between those who lived in the shaded gardens of the Oasis core and those who toiled on its sun-baked fringes. The social contract born of collective need could, over generations, harden into a rigid class structure. The transformation of the land was, therefore, a mirror. It reflected humanity's highest capacities for cooperation and cultural creation. but also its enduring struggles with power and equity. The same water that nourished a community's festivals could also water the roots of its deepest divisions. The most ingenious waterworks could not hold back a creeping white death. In the very cradle of irrigation, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerians built the first great hydraulic society. Their network of canals was a marvel, turning the floodplain into a lush garden that supported the world's earliest cities. Yet, with each season of watering, an invisible enemy accumulated. In the intense heat, water evaporated quickly from the fields, leaving behind the dissolved salts it had carried from the river and the deep soil. Over generations, this salt built up in the root zones, creating a toxic crust that stunted crops and slowly strangled yields. Ancient tablets tell the story not in scientific terms but in economic ones, recording a desperate shift from wheat to more salt-tolerant barley, and then, heartbreakingly, a decline in barley harvests as well. The land itself was growing sick. Their brilliant irrigation, without a comprehensive plan for drainage and leaching, had poisoned the source of their wealth. This was a slow-motion crisis unfolding over centuries, a testament to how a solution for one generation can become a trap for the next. The fields that had built Uruk and gradually whitened under the sun, a stark lesson that water management is not just about delivery, but about the long-term chemistry of the soil. A similar story of unintended consequences unfolded in one of the most isolated places on Earth. On Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, a thriving Polynesian society once flourished, constructing those iconic, mysterious stone figures called moai. Their success was built on a fragile foundation. The island's rich soil and lush palm forests provided everything needed for a complex culture, but as the population grew, so did the demand for resources. Trees were cut to build canoes, to roll the massive statues, and to clear land for agriculture. This deforestation set off a catastrophic chain reaction. Without tree roots to hold it, the fertile soil began to wash away with every rain. Erosion stripped the land of its productivity. The loss of palms meant no more wood for fishing canoes, collapsing the protein supply from the ocean. The society that had mastered stone found itself struggling against a landscape it had inadvertently unraveled. Their story is a powerful, haunting study in limits. It shows that an innovation, whether a new farming technique or a cultural practice, does not exist in a vacuum. It is part of a delicate web. When one thread is pulled too hard, the entire system can fray. The people of Rapa Nui did not face a sudden invasion or a single catastrophic event, but a slow, grinding environmental decline that their social structures could not ultimately reverse. Even the most robust systems could be shattered by a confluence of pressures. Consider the Byzantine Empire, which for centuries relied on the fertile plains of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, as its vital breadbasket. This region was the empire's agricultural heart, feeding the great city of Constantinople. Byzantine farmers used time-tested methods, but their prosperity was anchored to a stable climate and secure borders. Then the world began to change. Historical climatology suggests the region experienced periods of increased aridity and unpredictable rainfall during the empire's later centuries. At the very same time, the frontiers grew unstable. Raids and invasions disrupted the rural countryside, making the systematic, large-scale farming required to feed a metropolis increasingly difficult. Farmers abandoned their fields for safer areas. The intricate link between the Anatolian granaries and the capital was severed. Constantinople, a city of immense population, found its lifeline cut. This was not a failure of a single technology, but of resilience in the face of compounded stresses. The system was brittle. It could not adapt quickly enough to the dual shocks of a changing environment and rising human conflict. The empire did not fall in a day, but its strength ebbed away as its ability to feed itself diminished. proving that a breadbasket is only as secure as the peace and climate that surrounds it. These historical echoes are not mere tales of doom. They are essential chapters in the story of innovation itself. They teach us that every technological triumph exists within a set of ecological and social boundaries, a carrying capacity. The Sumerians pushed against the chemical limits of their soil. The society of Easter Island exceeded the regenerative limits of their forests. The Byzantines confronted the geopolitical and climatic limits of their supply lines. In each case, a rigidity set in, an inability or unwillingness to transform their core practices before the crisis became irreversible. Their legacies offer us a sobering mirror. Today, we face our own versions of these ancient challenges, from depleted aquifers and salinized fields to the vulnerabilities of globalized food networks. The past whispers a crucial question, not about how high we can build, but about how wisely we can sustain. It asks us to look at our own innovations and consider what are the quiet costs and what unseen limits might we be approaching. That ancient toolkit is not locked away in a museum. Its principles are being dusted off and rewired for a world where water scarcity is no longer a regional challenge, but a planetary one. In the sun-baked fields of modern Iran, engineers are not just maintaining old Qanats, they are studying them with satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, mapping their subterranean courses to understand how they sustained flow for millennia with zero fossil fuel input. This is low-tech genius speaking directly to a high-tech crisis, offering a blueprint for passive, gravity-fed water systems that could relieve pressure on over-pumped aquifers. The core idea, delivering water in darkness to avoid loss, finds its high-precision counterpart in the plastic veins of drip irrigation tubing. This modern system is a direct philosophical descendant of those hidden channels, applying the ancient lesson of minimal waste with digital exactitude, each drop metered and directed straight to the root zone where it is needed most. The layered wisdom of the Oasis is also experiencing a powerful revival under a new name, agroforestry. Where developers once saw empty land to be cleared, agricultural scientists now see a potential polyculture, a living system. In the Sahel region of Africa, where desertification has claimed vast tracts, projects are reintroducing the acacia tree into croplands. Just like the date palm, the acacia provides shade that reduces soil temperature and evaporation. Its leaves fertilize the soil, and its deep roots bring up water and nutrients from below, benefiting the shallow-rooted food crops planted alongside it. This is not just farming, it is ecosystem engineering, rebuilding the resilient, self-fertilizing gardens of antiquity to literally hold back the desert. Perhaps the most profound conversation with the past is happening at the genetic level. In seed banks and research laboratories, scientists are peering into the DNA of ancient landraces, those locally adapted varieties of sorghum, millet, and wheat that fed empires. These seeds carried genetic memories of drought, of salt, of heat, memories that were bred out of many modern high-yield varieties in favor of other traits. Now, in a warming climate, those forgotten traits are priceless. Researchers are identifying the genes that allowed a strain of barley to thrive in salty Mesopotamian soil, or a variety of sorghum to go dormant during a long dry spell. This genetic archaeology aims to breed new crops that are both high-yielding and resilient, essentially rearming our food supply with the ancient wisdom of survival. This global re-engagement with arid land wisdom reveals a pivotal shift in perspective. For much of the industrial age, the goal was to dominate nature, to force landscapes into maximum production using immense inputs of water, fertilizer, and energy. The ancient innovators, by stark contrast, worked from a philosophy of negotiation and symbiosis. They asked not how much they could take, but how the system could be balanced for the long term. Their legacy, now resurgent, teaches us that sustainability is not a new technology, but a very old mindset. It is the understanding that the most advanced system is often the one that aligns with, rather than overpowers, the fundamental logic of a place. The ghosts of those desert engineers are no longer just historical curiosities. They have become unexpected collaborators, their weathered blueprints offering a path forward in a century that will demand not just innovation but profound, time-tested wisdom. The dream of a green Sahara is an old one, but today it wears a new face, one framed by solar panels and genetic code. With vast tracts of land becoming drier and global food demand rising, the idea of turning the world's great deserts into fertile plains has moved from myth to serious scientific proposal. Could the Sahara or the Australian outback become the breadbaskets of a new age? The tools for this transformation seem, on the surface, almost magical. Imagine coastal megaprojects where endless arrays of solar panels power massive desalination plants, turning seawater into rivers of fresh water piped hundreds of miles inland. Picture fields of genetically engineered crops, their very DNA rewritten to thrive on salt water or to photosynthesize with impossible efficiency, creating abundance where even the hardiest ancient sorghum would struggle. Envision sealed, climate-controlled vertical farms rising like towers in the desert, where every drop of water is recycled, every photon of light is optimized, and harvests happen on a precise, year-round schedule, utterly independent of the hostile world outside. These are not science fiction fantasies, but active areas of research and investment, promising a future where human ingenuity finally severs the age-old link between agriculture and a forgiving climate. The ambition is breathtaking, a direct descendant of the imperial will that once commanded the waters of the Nile and the Tigris. Yet, to see this only as a triumph of technology is to miss the deeper story. Every proposal to green a desert must answer the same fundamental questions that the Nabateans and the Hohokam faced. Where will the water truly come from and who will control it? What happens to the soil over a century of cultivation, and who will benefit from this new abundance? Large-scale desalination, for all its promise, is an energy-intensive process that produces a challenging byproduct, hyper-salty brine, which must be carefully managed to avoid ecological damage. Genetically modified supercrops could revolutionize dryland farming, but if they are owned and controlled by a handful of corporations, do they risk creating a new kind of hydraulic dependency, where farmers must buy both the seed and the specific chemical inputs it requires? The glittering vertical farm may feed a city, but it requires enormous capital to build and significant energy to run, potentially placing food security in the hands of those who can afford the technology, rather than those who work the land. This is where the whispers of history become essential listening. The past teaches us that the most enduring agricultural systems were not just feats of engineering, but feats of social and ecological integration. They worked because they were sustainable in the deepest sense, designed to replenish the soil, to share the water, and to function within the carrying capacity of their region. The Kanat builder knew he was digging for his grandchildren. The terrace farmer understood his wall was holding back the future as much as the earth. Their innovations were rooted in a long-term contract with the land, a contract our modern, extractive models have often broken. The future breadbasket, therefore, cannot be built on technology alone. It must be built on a revived ancient wisdom. It would pair solar desalination with the water-conserving principles of drip irrigation, a direct echo of the Kanat's efficiency. It would deploy salt-tolerant crops while also instituting the careful leaching practices and crop rotations that kept Mesopotamian fields productive for generations. It would harness the power of genetic science to create resilient seeds, while ensuring those seeds and the knowledge to grow them remain a common heritage, not a private commodity. Most crucially, it would recognize that a desert transformed is not a vacuum filled, but a new ecosystem created. the social systems to manage this new landscape, the laws, the customs, the equitable distribution of its bounty, must be designed with the same care as the irrigation pipes. The dream of making the desert bloom is more urgent and more possible than ever, but the ghosts of salinized Sumer and abandoned canals urge caution. They remind us that every grand transformation carries the seeds of its own decline, often hidden in the slow chemistry of the soil or the fractured politics of water rights. The next imperial breadbasket will not be built by conquering the desert, but by conversing with it, by marrying the audacity of our new tools with the patient, communal wisdom of the old ones. The ultimate innovation may not be a new way to extract life from the sand, but a new way to belong to it. The story of these ancient breadbaskets is ultimately a story about time. The most successful systems were those that thought not in seasons, but in centuries. The Kanat digger knew his tunnel would water fields his grandchildren would tend. The terrace builder understood his stone wall was a covenant with the mountain, a promise to hold the soil for generations to come. They practiced a form of patience we have largely forgotten, an innovation measured not in quarterly yields, but in the slow, steady heartbeat of a landscape kept in balance. This long-term vision was their true secret, the hidden ingredient that turned clever engineering into enduring civilization. It forces us to ask a difficult question of our own era, where efficiency and immediate output often eclipse resilience. What does it mean to farm not just for a market, but for a future 100 years from now? The answer may lie in relearning the language of the land, a language those ancient engineers understood fluently. They listened to the whisper of the water table, read the story written in the salinity of the soil, and planned their societies around those quiet truths. In their world, sustainability was not a buzzword, it was the only logical outcome. A canal that silted up was a famine waiting to happen. A field that grew salty was a kingdom growing weak. Their survival was tied to a feedback loop they could not afford to ignore. Today, our feedback loops are global and complex, but the principle remains. The health of our soil, the reliability of our water, these are not environmental concerns separate from economics or politics. They are the foundation upon which everything else is built, just as they were for Babylon and Tenochtitlan. The empires of dust teach us that prosperity is a partnership with place, a continuous dialogue between human need and environmental reality. When that dialogue breaks down, when the balance tips too far, even the greatest achievements can fade back into the sand from which they came. Yet their legacy is not one of warning alone, but of profound hope. They prove that human creativity, when directed by collective wisdom and a deep respect for limits, can perform miracles of abundance. The challenge now is to channel that same ingenuity, not toward dominating nature, but toward collaborating with it once more. To look at a modern drought-stricken region and see not a wasteland, but a puzzle awaiting its solution, a landscape ready for a new kind of conversation. The tools have changed, but the essential questions echo across the millennia. How do we share the water? How do we heal the soil? How do we build systems that last? The past does not give us a blueprint to copy, but a compass to guide us. It points toward integration over extraction, toward diversity over monoculture, toward a patience that plans for the next harvest and the next century in the same breath. The next chapter in this ancient story is being written now, in research labs testing salt-tolerant grains, in communities reviving traditional water harvesting, in policies that value long-term soil health over short-term gain. We are all inheritors of that deep history, standing on the shoulders of those who first taught the desert to bear fruit. Their mysteries, once solved, become our inspiration, a testament to the enduring truth that from the dust, life can always find a way. These echoes from arid empires are not just artifacts, they are invitations. The silent, patient intelligence of the Kanat, the communal rhythm of the terrace, the biological genius of the legume, all speak to us across the centuries. They ask us to look at our own landscapes, our own challenges with water and soil, and to see them not as unprecedented crises, but as the latest chapter in a very long human conversation. So we turn the question to you, as you reflect on this journey from Persia to Petra, from the Andes to the American Southwest, which innovation left you in awe? Was it the hidden rivers of the Kanat, or the sky-defying ambition of the Noria? Perhaps it was the social contract of the Hohokam canals, proving that monumental works can arise from cooperation rather than coercion. And what modern parallels do you see unfolding around you today? Are there lessons from these ancient breadbaskets that could inform how we manage our own rivers, our own farmlands, in an era of changing climate? The comment section below is your space to continue this exploration. Share your perspective, your questions, or the parallel you've noticed in our world. This channel is dedicated to unearthing these hidden connections, to understanding how the choices of the past sculpt the possibilities of our present. If you want to join this ongoing excavation of history's deepest mysteries, be sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell. Together, we can keep pulling these essential threads because the story of how we feed ourselves, how we live with the land, is the most fundamental story we have. And sometimes the clearest path forward is found by listening to the whispers of those who came before.